our third and final project in the CPC201 class is an Alla Prima still life. So this may deviate a little bit from what we talked about in the last assignment. I really wanted you to stick to your process that you've been building up and not deviate from that at all until you've developed a baseline before even attempting to do any of these other styles. But now we're kind of going to just force you to do Alla Prima. So it's not just direct, it's Alla Prima. And so direct painting is you're working on a section at a time, resolving each piece as you go. Alla Prima opens it up even more, so you're not just resolving a section at a time, you're resolving the whole thing at a time. And so we're not just talking about getting sort of a block in, which is usually what I typically see in open studio sort of situations, but we're worried about getting an entire level of finish in a painting. And because of this, you'll notice they tend to be stylistic to some degree as well, either simplified more than we might expect a finished painting to look, or certain elements of it are handled similarly throughout the painting because they're efficient way to handle painting. And keep that in mind, that's really what we're talking about with Alla Prima. We're trying to describe in just a couple hours everything we see up on a scene the most efficient way possible. And some schools will call this trickery, because you're using every trick in the book you can to suggest what's up there on your canvas. So sometimes you deviate a little bit from what you see because you might be able to apply paint in a certain way or alter color in a certain way to quickly create a believable set of relationships and of color and edges and values up there. So this becomes sort of the key to Alla Prima. You can't just settle in and spend 20 hours painting a piece of fruit. You have to learn how to effectively suggest the fruit, and not just the shape, but also the luminosity, the texture of the fruit. Is it a juicy fruit? Is it an old dried fruit? The color of the fruit, the value range as well as edge range of the fruit. We have to accomplish all of this and then put that fruit in the context of the background and all the other pieces of element in there. So it's a big challenge with Alla Prima. But there are very definite advantages that we can learn from it, which is why I would encourage you guys every so often to do Alla Prima, even if your focus is longer term paintings, like indirect type of paintings. Alla Prima, first of all, absolutely forces you to achieve a correct set of relationships in one session. So that's sort of the given. Even if you have the best finishes in the world, if your relationships of color is bad, or your relationships of value is bad, or the drawing is off, it's a poor painting. So you'll find very, very quickly when you're dealing with Alla Prima that relationships becomes the overriding most important thing. So if your drawing skills are not good, Alla Prima is not going to be very efficient for you, because you have to be able to get the drawing right away without too much thinking. So if your drawing skills are weaker, I'll recommend, at least for the sake of the Alla Prima still life, that you select more organic type of objects. A piece of fruit where the shape doesn't have to be quite on, or a flower that doesn't have to be quite the exact petals or whatnot is what you see. That way we don't spend too much time noodling with the drawing. If your drawing skills are higher, you can tackle more advanced complex subjects or more rigid subjects like a pot or a vase or something like that, or maybe a figurine or something to that effect in there as well. But don't set yourself up for failure by selecting objects that are beyond your current drawing level. So that's sort of the first thing to consider. We have to get all those relationships correct. And for your first Alla Prima still life, if you get all of the relationships relatively correct and you just don't get into any refinement or finishing work, that's still a good start. That's kind of like a really good block in. But you need to keep at it and keep practicing, at least once a week or so, until by the end of that session, you're able to get all the highlights in there. You're able to make the fruit look juicy, and you're able to make the get texture on the foreground or background, all that sort of stuff. You learn how to suggest things. So this will be a big challenge. You have to keep at it. So like I said, one of the first things it teaches you is the importance of getting the big relationships. The second thing it'll allow you to do is be a little more risky in your painting, which can be helpful for the following reason. If you only have 5 minutes left on a painting, and you have a whole background to paint or a whole foreground to paint, you're not going to be able to paint it with maybe the little tiny brush that you're accustomed to. So all of a sudden, you have to be thinking, well, what's the best way that I can just throw in this background and make it look correct with a very limited amount of time? And usually your resulting answer is selecting a bigger brush and maybe pulling out your brush stroke chart and saying, okay, well, if I mix a scumble with some of the soft on, soft off, well, all of a sudden I can sort of suggest the texture here or the fabric over here or the cracks in the wall back here. And you'll throw it on. And hopefully it's right. It might be wrong. You might need to wipe off and try again. But what ultimately will happen is if you do this enough, and especially toward the end of your Alla Prima session when you've painted as much and as far as you can, and you've got nothing left to lose, then some of the times you'll actually hit a good solution to a problem. And this is ultimately what painting is about. Ultimately, in the end, if you get close enough to any painting, it's just little abstract paint strokes. That's all a painting is. It's the fact that we are far enough back to see those paint strokes blend with their surrounding paint strokes that we get a resulting image. And that's what a painting is. So Alla Prima will teach you how to lay down paint quickly and efficiently in the hopes that you discover a new and improved method of doing so that yields a solution faster and more effectively. And you may find that you'll take some of these Alla Prima solutions you find and bring them back into your studio solution. If you found a way to paint something that looks just as good in 5, 10, or 20 minutes that previously took you 3 hours to do because you're an indirect painter, well then you may find cause to just bring in that Alla Prima approach that you learned for this this section and do it more efficiently so you can spend time on your other areas of the painting. So this is very, very common. Also, if you ever end up wanting to do a landscape painting, landscape has to be painted very quickly. If you're going outside plein air, the light shifts a lot. You need to learn effective ways to paint large areas of a painting to yield something that looks reasonably similar to your subject. If you don't practice Alla Prima painting, you'll probably never be able to do this. So you need to have some capacity for Alla Prima painting. The more you practice Alla Prima painting, the more it'll help your indirect painting. The more you do indirect painting, the more you'll find that it might not be appropriate for all situations. So this is an appropriate tool to use. And if nothing else, it's good to use for studies. So even painters who do a lot of indirect painting primarily will do Alla Prima studies of a feature like a foot, a hand, a face, something like that, and then use that, and it becomes sort of an impression of what they remember when they first looked at their subject. And then when they are working on their indirect painting where they're spending hundreds of hours, having that Alla Prima still life there kind of reminds you of those main big picture ideas and relationships that you need to hold on to the very end. So I encourage you to practice this outside of class as well. First start off with just still life. It's going to allow you to crank a lot of these out and not have to worry too much about drawing. And then eventually, later on down the road, move to portraiture. The final thing that Alla Prima will give you an edge over is design and composition. If you think, if we spend 3 weeks or 5 weeks or 10 weeks on a single painting, you get to practice one design with that painting. You may have tried out several different designs at the beginning, but ultimately you're spending 10 weeks or whatever it is on the one design and one painting. Alla Prima allows you to set up, design, compose a painting every single time. You can set a new one each day, a new one each day, a new one each day. Now, provided you're actually paying attention to this and actually setting up different designs and not just painting the same setup over and over and over again, you'll find that your composition skills start to improve more and more and more. And this becomes a huge benefit of Alla Prima painting. We can get to practice 50 different compositional designs in a 10-week period, whereas if we were doing an indirect painting, you might only get to practice one. And so we find that Alla Prima painters tend to have interesting compositions, sometimes more lively compositions, less static compositions than indirect painters, just because they've had so much time practicing composition. So if you're an indirect painter, there's other things you have to do. You have to work a lot harder to maintain that compositional ability. So for those reasons, Alla Prima is going to be very, very useful for you. You're going to learn about the important relationships and make sure you hit them right on. You're going to start to take more risks towards the end and maybe learn a new method of paint handling that will improve your overall painting skills. You're going to be able to practice design and composition again and again and again. So for our purposes, we're going to try and shoot for a Alla Prima still life here. Keep your objects at a minimum. Only a couple is needed for a still life. Don't just make one object though, at least have something there so we can have a design flow to it, because again we are practicing composition and design. And then we're just going to spend 2 or 3 hours and see how lifelike we can get this in the amount of time. I don't want any unfinished paintings. I don't want just a section of the painting done. And I don't want it to look like just a regular block. And think about your finishing strokes here as we go. Pull out that brush stroke chart. Pull out examples of Alla Prima still life painters, and let's see if we can mimic some of what they do in our own work here in class.